Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and joining me today, all the way from England, is Mr. Marcus Katz. Hey there, Marcus.
Oh, hi, pleasure to be here with you.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Marcus. Now, Marcus, I'm really excited for the conversation that you and I are going to dive into today. But before we get there, for those of our listeners who this is your first time joining us here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast, this is a podcast where I bring you interviews from astrologers and mystics all around the world who aren't just changing their own lives through their spiritual practice, but they're also actively impacting this greater field of spirituality, astrology, and mysticism that we all know and love. And for this month of October, we are running a celebration of the month of magic, which means that we are broadening the field of conversations that we usually have, and we're integrating more people who represent the wider scope of the Western esoteric tradition. So if you want to be a part of the magic and the momentum that we're building here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast, give yourself a moment, go down below, like this video, but also hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell so that you receive notifications of when I bring you these interviews each and every week. Now, Marcus, once again, it's truly a pleasure and an honor to be sitting here with you. So thank you so much for spending the time with me.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. I have my blank whiteboard. I can never do a talk without having a whiteboard next to me. So this is there just in case I need to illustrate anything we're going to talk about.
Great stuff, Marcus. Now, Marcus, I was telling you before we went on air that when I was in university about 10 years ago, I remember that there was this amazing thing that happened online within the tarot community, and that was the creation of this platform called Tarot Town. And I know that you were integrally a part of the creation of that. So can you tell us a little bit about what Tarot Town was and why you had the internal inclination to even create a platform like that?
Okay, well, it's an interesting step in the whole evolution of social media, because at the time Facebook hadn't really taken root as much as obviously it has since then, in the last decade, dare we say. What my co-author Tali Goodwin and I wanted to do was set up a platform using, I can't remember the name of the system we used at the time. It was a sort of Ning type variant. And so we set up a whole community. We wanted the sense of a community to be built into the system itself, because at the time there was one major tarot forum, there were some Yahoo discussion lists and things like this, but they were very flat. And also they were quite anonymous, and the moderation was variable on each of these platforms. So what we decided to do was set up a place that people could build their own space within. We wanted to encourage people to have a space that they could do their stuff within and contribute and develop their creativity within it, rather than trying to enforce that just by the actual network structure itself. So it took us a very frantic weekend to build and launch Tarot Town, including the name of it, the logo, the actual physical website itself. And we used to have lots of fun there, lots of ongoing things that were more like an adventure or a collaborative narrative. And over the years, we've obviously seen the rise of social media that virtually made Tarot Town quite obsolete, because social media was then replacing a lot more of the social interaction that we built into Tarot Town. So more recently, we've developed things, for example, our website Arcatia, which is a mystery site. That is to say, it has one animation on the front of the site, a subscription button, and that's it. So you do not know really what you're going to get. And we wanted to build a mystery site because it replicates, when we then later talk about the fall and the fool's leap, an act of faith, we know that that person has experienced that because they've taken that leap to subscribe to a site that they have no idea what they're subscribing to, other than it's connected with us and it has a brief animation and narrative at the start. So we wanted to use social media to replicate the initiatory path in action. So not just saying it, not just doing a meditation on it, but the actual things you have to do are the initiatory system we built underneath it. So our Cartier, for example, took about 10 years to devise and create, and it's got about 180,000 words of text in it over a year. So it's the equivalent of a good 3 books, solid books. But we've hidden everything we've done. We've not behind a gate. So you have to have the faith to enter that gate in order to then experience what's beyond it.
Well, Marcus, I'm going to definitely put that down below in the description box, a link to our Cartia, so that more and more people can interact with that content and possibly even take that leap of faith, because I think it's a beautiful thing that you've done in terms of figuring out how to create that initiatic process online.
Yeah, well, we've had a lot of attempts at it. I mean, we have had to experiment with it a lot. Our initiatory order, which is, I think this discussion is one of the first times I've really discussed this in public. We have developed ways of working initiation rituals that we can send to people and still have them not know what they're about to do. So, and graduate that a little bit as well. So we've had to work within the technology that we have in order to provide a modern day initiatory system. And also we've had to be very core to our central beliefs. We have to live those and act on them. So for example, in our Cartier, the subscription button is only live 4 days a year. So on the equinoxes and the solstices. So no doubt we could make a lot more throughput and money and things like that by having it open all of the time, because people can join it technically whenever they want. But we felt it important that that was a magical gate that was only open on the solstice and on the equinoxes. So it is only open 4 times a year. And then, so we open the subscription and then we close it the day after the solstice. And then we have to wait for another, 3 months before we then open it just for 1 day again. But again, that makes it a magical thing. That gate is literally open like a magical gate at those times. So we've tried to hold true to those principles in building what we built.
Marcus, in creating essentially an initiatic tradition within the 21st century, how have you found people responding to that? Have you found that people have been hungry and wanting to really plug themselves deeply into a path like this that has that old world mystique of actually being a part of a physical mystery school? Or what's the reception been like?
Okay, well, thank God it's been very little, because that means that we can work more seriously with the people that we have. when I started in the early 80s, that's 1980s, I flitted with the Golden Dawn, the OTO, and other groups, but I never really found the group that I wanted to join. So a group of friends and I set up something that the main guy in the group who taught me an awful lot at the time, it was called the Illuminated Congregation of Melchizedek, ICOM for short. And we decided that it would be a networked order. And this is like literally before the internet. So I can remember showing the members of ICOM a bulletin board on my Amiga computer and saying, you see this? This isn't on my computer. This is Manchester University we're looking at. And there were like gasps of like, oh my God, we've sort of reached across the abyss into this other world. And I can remember my teacher saying at the time, you know, in the future, the currency will be imagination. And I remember that to this day because it's becoming more true. As technology advances, it's what we do with it that is the real currency. So I think back then we worked with Thelemites, we worked with shamans, we worked with rune readers, we worked with witches, and we used to have meetings at our temple in Derbyshire, and we built a fully operational Golden Dawn temple at the time, and would have regular meetings. We did the zodiacal rituals, which were a 12-month sequence of rituals where, as the sun entered each sign of the zodiac, there was a specific ritual written for each of them. But most importantly, we plugged in what we were doing in our real life into the rituals. So you always had to come with something you were doing in real life in order to bring that and feed into the ritual and take out of the ritual that back into your real life. So already we were experimenting with a non-hierarchical magical order. Again, that went through lots of iterations, and eventually the Order of Everlasting Day is my best current bet at a networked, non-hierarchical order where there is still a structure. So we have, for example, waypointers at stations. So someone, an individual, will take over a station if they're suited to do that. And as people pass through their station, they're assigned to them, and then they move on to the next station. But the station masters can be moved around. So in that way, we still make the journey, but it's not like a pyramid or this secret is reserved for a higher grade and you'll have to wait a year before we, as Crowley said, induct you into the mysteries of the Hebrew alphabet. He was very disappointed when that's all the Golden Dawn offered him.
Now, I know that the Order of Everlasting Day is the specific order that you created, and I definitely want to dive more deeply into that conversation with you. But Marcus, tell our listeners and viewers about what it was like with you coming into the Western esoteric tradition in the 1980s. What attracted you to it, and what's kept you in it for all these years?
I was about 13 when I first made my first steps into the Western esoteric industry system, as I call it now. And at the time, I was interested in witchcraft. I lived in a sort of very small village, and I had woods in my garden at the back of me, so I could just wander off into the woods and so on. My brother had a rock, my younger brother, who was 2 years younger than me, had a rock magazine, and in the back of it, it had a little advert for contact real witches and magicians. And there was a service called the Golden Wheel, which was like a mailbox service where you had a list sent to you of different people advertising, and you had to write a letter to any of these people who looked of interest, and then seal it in an envelope, put their box number on top of it, pay a little fee, and then the Golden Wheel whoever they were, some people in a basement, no doubt, would then send that on, write the real address of the person and send it on. And if they were interested, then they would write back to your actual address. And as a result, I contacted like everyone. I just went through the list and contacted everyone. And one of the lucky things for me was there was a small occult shop that set up in Derby called the Ace of Wands. And I was too young to go there really, but I sort of went in, and they wouldn't sell me a tarot deck or anything. So at the time I made my own. I got permission to go into the adult library, because obviously I didn't have access to the adult library in Belper, just near to where I lived, went to school. And I found a Stuart Kaplan book. And strangely enough, about 30 years later, I got to thank Stuart Kaplan to his face for giving me this head start, and I had to apologize him for pirating one of his decks as well, which is another story. But his book had pictures of tarot cards in it. So I got my dad to photocopy on one of these huge original photocopiers at the time that weren't available to anyone other than sort of medium-sized businesses. He photocopied them. I cut them out, the major arcana, and sellotaped them onto cardboard. And I took them into school and started doing readings for people. And I didn't know what to put them in, and my stepmom had a load of these old cloth bags that had coffee in them. So took the coffee out and put the cards in. I used to go around school like the coolest 13-year-old in school with my little bag. And this is the bag, and these are the tarot cards that I made when I was 13.
Wow.
So you can see the sellotape is still holding very strong. So that is the deck, and it's a IJJ, Swiss 1JJ or IJJ deck. And I used to read from this little set of cards. There's the magician there,
wow.
Sort of sellotaped on. Obviously, no one trusted me with glue at the time. But I had no idea really what I was doing, other than I knew the Celtic cross, and I had this deck of cards. So I used to read the Celtic cross with the majors with reversals as well. And no one told me it was difficult, so I had no problem with it. Nowadays, people would say, oh, how can you read just a 10 major arcana with reversals for like, does Samantha fancy me? And things like that. The questions that a 13-year-old was asked. But I must have had a little bit of marketing sense even back then, because I realized that if I got to the canteen earlier than anyone else, I could sit at a table and put my cards out and read with them, practice my own readings, where the queue was for the canteen. So people would walk by in the queue and have to stand in the queue waiting, looking at me doing the cards. And then obviously I had a load of people every single day to practice with. So that's really how I got started. When I was 18, well, when I was 16, I approached a witchcraft coven through the local shop. The guy there knew that I was quite serious. I'd already been going for about 3 years by then. So he offered to put me in touch with our local coven. And I met the guy who was the priest of that coven. He'd been initiated by Patricia Crowther. So it was Gerald Gardner, Patricia Crowther, the guy that taught me and initiated me. But I had to wait 2 years to be initiated until I was 18. So it was literally on my 18th birthday that I cycled all the way to Nottingham and got initiated into the Gardnerian tradition. And after that, I guess I developed my interest in Crowley, the Kabbalah. The guy at the shop had advised me to study yoga and mental yoga as well first, before diving into Kabbalah and so on. So I was doing a lot of meditation work. In fact, I dug out, this is like one of the sheets of my time. So I kept a really good journal throughout all of that time as well, which I since over the last 40 years realized the importance of. And I actually looked up what I was doing on this day 37 years ago, and I was practicing my fourfold breath.
Wow.
And I kept a little chart as well, which I have somewhere or another. I took a fairly scientific approach to it because I was reading Crowley, but this is sort of like 83 or 84. I actually worked out whether the length of time I could keep my mind focused on one thing was related to the phases of the moon. So I kept a graph over time and noticed that particularly towards the autumn equinox and the full moon, my concentration would ebb and flow with the phases of the moon. So I took a very serious approach to my studies. I practiced witchcraft rituals with a high priestess for about 10 years. Every day we were doing a ritual. Every evening I'd get back from college and we do a ritual. It was an esbat, a sabbat, an invocation, an evocation, a divination, and so on. When the chaos magic movement really first started, I went to see Pete Carroll and discuss work with him. And then I pursued the syllabus of the Chaos Magic Group, although they weren't expecting that. So when I arrived with my full syllabus and my diary notes for marking, and they were like, oh my God, we've got someone who's actually bothered to follow it. What do we do? So it was exciting times. There were a lot of underground magazines going that I wrote articles for. I think I probably published the world's first computer program for occultism, which was a Gematria program in one of the early Chaos International magazines. So yeah, it was fun times. It was experimental times, and it was before the internet, before the rise of the neo-pagan movement and Wicca and so on, which have obviously gone through decade-long phases, at least 3 decade-long phases since I started.
Now, Marcus, the topic that we're going to be speaking about today is tarot as an initiatic path within itself. So I want to know from you, at what point in time did you actually dive into tarot, not just from the perspective of tarot as divination, but from the perspective of tarot as a mystical path?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that transition was influenced and informed by other people. There was a book by Richard Gardner called something like The Wheel of Tarot or something. And I remember to this day reading it, because for the very first time I read in it that he'd applied tarot to the phases of life, basically, and certain types of people in the world. And I can remember thinking, and I told my high priestess at the time, you can do more with tarot. And it was just something very initiatory for me. I was initiated through the reading of that. And at the same time, I was working with the guy who was my teacher for the first sort of 10 years maybe. And he was very much already embedded in ceremonial magic and the Gurdjieff work and various other things that I'd not really interfaced with. And I was coming through Kabbalah and ritual and witchcraft. And so when we met, we developed the seeds of what this system is now. And that was really when we first started to try and model people's initiatory progress on the Tree of Life and on tarot. And the only difference that I could see at the time to what we were doing and what I still do is we were looking at states of awareness. We weren't interested in grades. We weren't interested in skills. We weren't interested in methods. We weren't interested in natural genius or anything. We were only interested in states of awareness. And the way of telling someone state of awareness is the questions that they ask. Someone in this state of awareness will not be asking the questions of someone in this state of awareness. Their concerns, their knowledge, their experience will divert their questions from where they are. And that's why the method that I teach really encourages questions. It only works through questions. We encourage our members of the order to ask questions and be given questions, because we exhaust the state of being that those questions reside in. And the tarot is a beautiful illustration because of its archetypal basis. It has stabilized over the years into 78 cards, 3 sets, court cards, minors, majors, and so on. And it's stabilized for a reason. It's stabilized into that pattern because it's how we see the world. And everything is how we see the world. So it matches as a model. And over the years, with experience of watching people progress through the initiation system, we found a way of both grading, provoking initiatory states. Different sets of work are far better suited to different states, and so on, in order to make that progress through the grades. And I use tarot as an illustration of that. And to be honest, the reason we set up the Tarot Association, amongst several other reasons, is to teach the language by which we'd be talking to people in about 20 years' time. And we have got almost to that 20 years where we can say, you've studied the tarot through Tarosophy, through the Tarot Association, and so on. That's a language. It's a language for engaging with the world, for divining how the world is. But where is the place in which that language is spoken? Now come over here and we'll show you the place where we all speak that language, because that's why you've been learning it.
Now, Marcus, something that you said really struck a chord within me, and I'm going to split it into 2 sections, because you said that we ask questions for the purpose of exhausting that part of the self from whence those questions arise, essentially. And you and I both know that in the divinatory process, there is nothing more sacred than the question, because the question is really the fuel that empowers the larger machine of the divination that we're practicing. But I want to know from you, Marcus, what do you think the purpose of the question as a singular concept actually is? And then I want to touch on that other piece about what does get exhausted within us when we ask these deep soul-felt questions.
Those are brilliant questions. Thank you very much for those. I think when I was younger, I did a lot of NLP sort of work, and when I moved away from my IT background, I went on a lot of NLP courses with Richard Bandler and John Grinder, Paul McKenna, the whole range of people. And one of the things that came out of that for me is never deny someone their state. If someone is in a state, you never deny it. And as a result, there's also a concept in Ericksonian hypnotherapy where we talk about utilization and incorporation. So I always want to incorporate and utilize something. So in my NLP work, for example, I had a guy come to me to give up smoking. And he was sort of sent to me by his wife, who knew me personally through something else, some volunteer work that I was doing. And so he came to me and he sat there and he said, well, I'm here because she keeps going on about it, and I don't suppose it will, be any good. I'm not a weak-willed person. I don't think I can be hypnotized. And I said to him, well, it looks like you're a very strong-willed person. And I don't think maybe hypnotism is going to be very good for you. And he sat there with his arms folded like this and said, no, I don't think so. So this is a waste of time, isn't it? And I said, yeah, it's going to be a real waste of time, because someone as strong-willed as you isn't really going to, hypnotherapy only works with people who can't, control their own minds almost. And I carried on for an hour. We had this hour-long discussion of me telling him how strong-willed he was and how this was a waste of time and hypnotherapy was useless because it only worked with people who could, make a decision and stick to it and blah, blah, blah. And he left, and, I saw his wife a bit later, and she said, oh, I gather it didn't work very well. And I said, yeah, I'm sorry about that. But of course, he gave up smoking. And the next time I saw him, he said, oh, yeah, mate, well, I'm a bit embarrassed. Obviously, it didn't work. But I decided to give up anyway. And I said, oh, that's really good. Well done. Oh, brilliant. And I'm sorry I couldn't have been more help. But that is because we utilized and incorporated his singular state, which was, I am strong-willed and I cannot be hypnotized. But he was already hypnotizing himself. As Doug O'Brien said, a great hypnotherapist and NLP practitioner, he said, you are not the first hypnotist on the scene. Everyone has been hypnotized by their parents, by their peers, by their upbringing, by themselves. So we utilize and incorporate that. And that is where the question is coming from. The question comes from the illusion that we are a separate being with an identity. And neither of those things are true. We are not separate and we have no identity. But we hypnotize ourselves, and we are taught how to do it from childhood into that state. And because it's not true, there will always be questions until there aren't. When that becomes not true, there are no more questions. There can't be, because there's no one to have the question. And there's nothing to ask. So until that point, there will always be questions. And that is the key to the pegs that we have to undo in order to realize that there is a simple question. And that is, the universe is its own inquiry. And the universe is saying to itself, what the fuck am I? And that is what we are. That is what it is. But until we get to that point, that happy, paradisical point, then we will always have subsidiary questions that fall underneath that bracket. And that is really where the questions come from.
Marcus, something that I've found within my own practice over the years, literally at this point, 15 plus years of practicing tarot seriously, is that in the beginning I was gung-ho about asking questions, and as I look back on my tarot journals from my youth, they are chock full of questions. Every time I meet someone, is this the person? Is this the one? Am I in love? Why isn't this person calling me back? And so I went through this childhood experience because I came into it as a child, and then that developed into a teenage experience where I was in university and I had university questions to ask, which weren't that different from my childhood questions. They were still, is this person the one? Am I in love?
Yeah.
And as I came into young adulthood and adulthood, as a practicing professional tarot reader, I found that I asked less and less questions of the tarot. It was as if something had solidified within me that didn't detract from the fact that I could still give somebody else a brilliant reading. But for me personally, the questions that I asked were less question oriented, like, should I call this person? And it slowly morphed into, what guidance does the universe have for me right now? And that doesn't even happen that frequently. It happens it went from happening every week to probably once a month to, but I still feel as if the tree of tarot is deeply rooted within me. Has there been an arc of inquiry for you within your own practice, whereas how you interacted with tarot when you were younger, you've seen a metamorphosis of that as you've grown older?
Yeah, I think it's there's a couple of mystics I really recommend within our order as part of our fairly comprehensive reading list. One is Irina Tweedy, who was apprenticed to a Sufi teacher, and the other is Bernadette Roberts, who was a Catholic mystic. I think Irina Tweed has passed away, but I think Bernadette Roberts is still alive, I think. And both of them do make the point that our maturation, our natural growing up and development is synonymous with the initiatory system. They can't be separated out. So it may be that you still ask the question, when we have a joke in the Tarot Association, when will Dwayne come back to me? That's the essential question, is not will he come back to me, or should he come back to me, or why can't I find someone who isn't Dwayne? The question is always, when will Dwayne come back to me? And I think over time you still ask the question, but you recognize that Dwayne is the name of your soul and is the name of the other person's soul. And so you're asking and answering the question down here, but you're seeing the resonance up here somewhere at the same time. So that also makes it quite useful to treat all questions as a valid question, because at the end of the day, that person is their own arising nature of the divine. So if they're asking a stupid question, that is only because one doesn't understand that that is the question the whole universe is asking at that moment. And so we have another saying, the oracular moment is sacrosanct, which I guess is a rewording of, the question is sacred. It is because it's the only thing we have. And no matter how misguided it is or appears to be, it's still real. It's still present. It's being presented. So I think over time, a bit like Crowley, I tend to read the I Ching a little bit more than the tarot these days. And I've gone through phases and arcs of feeling like I've exhausted tarot to some extent, and then I pick up the I Ching again, or runes, or some other system, and then I go back to tarot. But I never go back to tarot where I left it. I go back to tarot somewhere here, and so on. So I think we all do have that process of like a love affair with the tarot. It's an ongoing thing.
Definitely, Marcus. Now, you mentioned this rising nature of the divine within a person, and I know that within our Western tradition, we refer to that contact point as the holy guardian angel, or we refer to that experience or that ultimate experience as striking or having a communication or a conversation with that holy guardian angel. Can you tell us a bit about how the tarot enables someone to take part in that conversation?
Okay. It's a bit of a trick question because the definition of holy guardian angel, as Crowley pointed out, is so ludicrous as to not be believable. The idea that we have, here's it's like a picture from the tarot deck that we're developing at the moment of an angel. People would recognize that as an angel holding, in this case, a glowing wheel. But so we have the wings here, and we have the robe and the facial expression of divinity or inner peace and so on. And we recognize that as an angel. The idea that we have a singular angel that somehow looks after us and we contact in some way or another is a bit misleading. I didn't write a lot about that in my published journal of the Abramelin work, which was the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, because even 7 years after that, when I came to write up my journal for it and publish it, I wasn't quite ready to, I didn't feel able to communicate properly what I meant to say. I did get a second chance with the complete book of ceremonial magic. I wasn't given very long to write my section for it. I was brought in very late, like literally, I wrote my section in about 2 weeks. And everyone else had been given a year and you know, had fully cited, annotated, comprehensive, brilliant articles on their particular interest and pursuit and study and expertise. And I was given just a couple of weeks. I was actually given 4 weeks, but I made it a matter of point to come in within 2 weeks. I got a second chance to really describe what I see as the Holy Guardian Angel. And in brief, in summary, with the tarot, you're not contacting or communicating with the Holy Guardian Angel in a sense, but you are contacting that thing by the act of divination itself. So when you seek to divine something, whether it's past, future, present, that doesn't have an obvious and apparent answer, then that state of perception of the world that you can somehow connect to something beyond yourself is a knock on the door of the Holy Guardian Angel. It's saying, hey, I'm me, other people are doing their thing, the universe is not in my control. However, I can shuffle these cards and lay them out and get a picture of something, even though I don't know how these bits of paper are connected to the rest of the universe. And in that central inquiry, your Holy Guardian Angel is at your shoulder, because the Holy Guardian Angel is nothing more nor less than the constant living communication and knowledge of unity. And so the angel disappears eventually at the abyss, because after that point, there's no self that the angel can have knowledge of or communicate with. So, but to sacrifice the Holy Guardian Angel is something that literally can't be done by a person. Having gained it at the grade of Adeptus Minor, it's hard enough living with that, and then to imagine that you can then sacrifice it is a totally different thing. So the I think the best way of putting it is it's like tuning forks, and you sort of resonate. So every single inquiry, every single divination is knocking on the door that echoes up the aeons and the ethers and however the worlds, whatever you want to call them, and back down again. So, and also tarot for me is learning the language by which you can communicate with that which is unseen, and hence esoteric or occult. It literally means that which you can't see. So you may get to see the Holy Guardian Angel, but when you do, it isn't anything that you have seen before or will ever see again, because it can't be by definition.
I think it's interesting how essentially in the journey that you described, we all start at the bottom, or we all start in this Malkuth experience essentially. And when you're living completely based in the materiality of Malkuth, it seems as if that knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel is really the crux of everything you do, and that's really the intention. But I love what you say, that as we move beyond that, or as we progress beyond that, and as we move beyond having that sense of unity and integration with our holy guardian angel again, even that we have to give up if we're to move higher into the supernals. And so I think that this constant thing of having a goal and attaining that goal, and then realizing that even the attainment of that goal has to be sacrificed as we move higher, is this beautiful and tragic but deeply moving story that's built into the structure of initiation in general, but specifically within the initiatic structure that was laid out by the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn got it from the German Order of the Rosy Cross via probably via Kenneth Mackenzie, who was likely the author of the cipher manuscripts that made the Golden Dawn. But if you go back to the original Rosicrucian order, the German one, which was about 100 years prior, it was a very alchemical group, but they did lay out that ground plan, and they did match the grades to the Tree of Life, for which we will forever be in their service, in the sense of, most philosophy, as Whitehead said, we're all footnotes of Plato. No matter what we do, we're basically just redescribing what Plato said in different words. And in the same way, all initiation systems are footnotes of the GRC, in that we're just working with that fundamental and novel concept that you can map the grades. And, I've spent most of my life, and virtually all of my life, mapping those grades, watching people. And, it's like Defrijon said, you can map his life, a well-known mystic who passed away maybe several years ago. You can map his life to the grades. You can map Irina Tweedy's life to the grades. You can map Bernadette Roberts to the grades. When Bernadette Roberts talks about the passage, it's just because she doesn't know Kabbalah, know that that's the abyss. But she still comes up with almost exactly the same terminology and experiential nature of it. And I think that sense of exhaustion is very important, to come back to that point you made earlier, which is that what we're exhausting is our attachment and illusion. There's a wonderful word, metanoia, which means the loss of forgetfulness of the soul. So we are not trying to gain our soul. This is why I hate all of these, passive income, soulful entrepreneurs and things like this, soul-centered business and so on. The soul has no business. It has no business here. It's so nonsensical, where people will tell you that you can gain X, Y, or Z. I'm afraid if you join my order, you're not going to gain anything other than you're going to lose some money in terms of your subscription. And we are going to try and help you lose any of the illusionary nature of your attachments to identity. So it's a constant exhaustion of, you've got to do this until you realize that the answer's not here. As my teacher once said to me, everything at every level is all ice cream. Different flavors, and you can like chocolate or vanilla or strawberry or raspberry or you have a flake in chocolate in it or sprinkles or whatever. But at some point, you just get sick of ice cream. And that is the initiatory point where everything is just the same, different variations. And people who are successful in Malkuth don't need to ask questions. Their questions are, how can I make more money? How can I get more followers? How can I get more likes? How can I do these things? But if that is all ice cream, and you're sick of ice cream, then the questions have to change. But to some extent, you do have to exhaust a lot of those things. Otherwise, if you try and take those into the Abramelin, they will get burnt away from you faster than you can think. And if you're not ready for that, then it can be such a devastating and toppling experience that the still surviving embers of personality and the soul will attach themselves again and make a husk around you. And this is what Crowley really referred to as the Black Brothers, the idea that there's this sense of like a sort of cosmic black hole that is drawing all of the light into it because it's having to hold its center of gravity, its attachment, because it's been attacked too much. You know, if we attack someone's beliefs, we're attacking them, because a person is nothing more than their belief. That is all a person is a set of beliefs with a mouth, you know. And so we have to utilize that and sometimes encourage people to do something until they get so sick and tired of it that it reaches that catastrophe cusp of a curve and the wave falls under. But we have to have cleared the ground enough so that there's a safe landing and as clean as possible. It's never perfect, but otherwise people will keep destroying their lives and messing up and losing relationships and lots of other things that are just the byproduct, what Kenneth Grant called tangential tantrums of energy, that we prefer that people use tarot correspondences to build a scaffolding so that they can climb up the scaffolding and fix the roof and then take the scaffolding down knowing that they put it up. If you just go at it with a sledgehammer and a wrecking ball, then it might be very exciting. And a lot of magicians have very exciting lives, but that's not necessarily the most efficient way of progressing.
As you're speaking, Marcus, I'm reminded of something that was said by the alchemist Basil Valentine, in which he said that our stone, in reference to the philosopher's stone, our stone isn't a stone to which something is added, but it's a stone from which much is taken away. And what he's essentially referring to is that within the heart of each of us is already the existence of this philosopher's stone that many search for but never find. And if we tell the vulgar where it is, they would tell us that we're lying. But it's this stone that resides within the heart of each of us. And we don't add anything to that, but we take away the extraneous, we take away the things that have no relevance or that cannot give that stone any vital power, which is essentially the entire shape of materiality that we build around ourselves, that tells us that there is something to be gained from the manifestation of the material life that I have. And there is something intrinsically meaningful to be gained from the manifestation of this outer life of matter. But I love what you said about the person who is successful in Malkuth. They have no reason to climb up the tree of life because essentially I'm so deeply caught up within my success and my conquest of matter and my ability to presumably tame this material world that it gets very comfortable sitting in the essence of that and feeling like a king of something, because fundamentally we all know that when we begin that ascension up the tree of life, any sense of kingship is lost because we're essentially moving into things that we have no frame of reference for within this material existence.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, there's some beautiful ice cream out there. There really is. It's very, very nice. There's you reminded me of a Kate Bush song where she says, "Just when I think I'm king, I just begin," and it's actually the song where she references Gurdjieff. Um, um, Them Heavy People is the name of the song. And it's a very Gurdjieffian song. She literally talks about G, as in Gurdjieff, in the song. And it is a struggle. I mean, it isn't a necessarily easy thing, and nor should it be. Dafri John said, it's always already too late. That if you're inquiring, you're already from the wrong point of view. You're not, illuminated. You're not initiated at the highest level or whatever, enlightened, because otherwise you wouldn't be looking for something. So if you are searching, if you are questing, then it's always already too late, because you've moved away from, as you're saying, that central alchemical stone. I think as well, it reminds me of the idea that in alchemy, the aim is not to make gold. People always say this, but the aim of the alchemist was to make the true stone, the philosopher's stone, the alchemical stone, and then go and use it to touch things, to turn them into gold. And it's like the hero's journey. The end of the hero's journey is not defeating the dragon, it's the return. So the hobbits come back to the Shire after they've destroyed the ring. And then they have some tidying up to do, whether it's in the film or not, but they have some tidying up to do. And that is part of the, I guess, one of the more interesting challenges of the great work is how do you then apply it to life? How do you apply these things? Yes, you can go and, end up on your own private island with sitting with satsang with a whole group of disciples. But what is that actually adding to the world? If we all did that, who would clean the telephone boxes? Who would make the computers? Who would do anything other than sit in an illuminated state? And that doesn't seem to be the answer to me. So I think part of the challenge as we progress is what do we then do? How do we utilize and incorporate our own state in Malkuth? Because we don't leave any of the Sephiroth. We stay in all of them all of the time, because it's just one thing. I think that's probably a longer discussion down the line, but it is an interesting question as to how we apply this thing, because we spend most of our time trying to lose the forgetfulness of our state, but we mustn't lose the forgetfulness that we're here. And we're here to ask questions, but we're also here to do things with other people as well. And that's quite an interesting one.
Marcus, you mentioned forgetfulness earlier, and there is a rabbi who made commentary on the Kabbalah, and one of his famous quotes is that forgetfulness is exile. What I want to know from you essentially is for our listeners and viewers out there who are wanting to get into the tarot as a field of experience, or even potentially as a way of establishing that scaffolding of the temple, which is a quote from Frater Akkad in QBL, The Bride's Reception, where he speaks about establishing the scaffolding of the temple for people wanting to interact with tarot in that way. What do you think is the first step for them? Do you think that they should begin tarot from the perspective of asking, when will Dwayne come back to me? Or do you think that they should step into the tarot from this deeper philosophical space that you and I are speaking from?
I think, to be fair, it doesn't matter, and it's perhaps a false dichotomy that you can do both. Um, after I was trying to work out how many years it's been since I started, and I was thinking 27 years, that's a long time, that's almost 30. Then I realized it's 37 years, it's almost 40, which is terrible, terrifying number. But if I could go back again and tweak my course a little bit, there's not a lot I would really want to change, I think. Although there were certain times when I could have had more ice cream than I actually had. I think I would encourage people to understand correspondences. Correspondences is so intrinsic to the Western esoteric initiatory system, and it's so important to learn, and quite easy. You just have to learn that, Malkuth, 10, Earth, Saturn, citrine, olive, russet, and so on. And you just have to learn all of these things. And it's not wasted. There's a reason, a really important, fundamental reason, and it's intrinsic to Western esotericism. Correspondences is the gem of teaching, even though it's the most obvious and simple and mundane of things. You just have to learn these things. Applying them in ritual helps activate them. When the Golden Dawn folded, the original Golden Dawn, it didn't really fold because there were arguments between Mathers and Crowley, and Waite had left and Yeats was writing this and so on. When you look at the student records, a lot of them are writing letters to each other complaining that they're not being taught. And some of them are complaining that they're having to learn a load of things and they don't know why. And some of them are complaining that they're doing all of these rituals, but they don't understand what's going on. And that's because the Golden Dawn had failed in its singular thing, which was to teach the correspondences. So you took those things and you utilized them in ritual. And that's why it folded, because the Golden Dawn was primarily to teach correspondence underneath everything else. And I think for people these days, there's no real such thing as a neophyte, because we have all of the information at our fingertips. So forget neophytes. There's no neophytes. There's very bad neophytes, but there's no real true neophyte. But a zealator is someone who commits themselves to a course of study for at least a year and holds fast to it. It doesn't matter what that study is. It could be Kabbalah, it could be tarot, it could be weaving and masket making. But a 1 year concentrated study on one thing is the essential building block of later work, where you do have to commit yourself to things that you can't see the reason for until it happens. And that requires a long act of faith that you have to practice early on. So I would say to people to, we have so much that we produced over the years, books, courses, our Magicka School project, the Tarot Association, and we've always done it with the understanding that these are the outer courtyards to the Western esoteric initiatory system. So there's no wasted learning in what we teach. We've always designed it specifically for people to later come to the Crucible Club, go through the Crucible Club, come into the order, and then utilize all of that stuff and see where it's coming from.
Well, Marcus, I definitely want to have you back on the show again to talk to us a bit more in depth about the correspondence systems that are inbuilt within the tarot and that are really the foundation of any Western approach to magic, as well as the Western esoteric tradition as well. So please do, whenever you're ready, let me know and we'll have you back on the show, because that is a conversation that I think more and more people need to be privy to, especially today. I am heavily involved in the astrological community and also heavily involved in the tarot community. And what I found in doing these interviews and just speaking with people is that there are astrologers who think that tarot has nothing to do with their own practice. And there are also tarot people who think that astrology has nothing to do with their practice. So it's interesting to see that because you and I both know that these two things, they in a lot of ways serve as one unified system that has the ability to feed each other. So I would love for you to come back and talk to us some more about what those correspondences actually are so that we could begin to build a dialogue of unity between these two sister subjects.
We should talk about the inner guide meditation then at some future point, because that marries them in a simple way. Anyone can use, understand, spend a whole year working with the inner guide meditation by Edwin Steinbrecher. And basically you take your own natal chart, you translate it into tarot, and then you actively work with that in real time to change your whole life. And it's a very powerful, simple, elegant, and safe framework to employ or deploy all of those correspondences. So, yeah, we'll have a discussion on that later, I hope.
Most definitely. Now, Marcus, tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you if they're wanting to receive a consultation with you or if they're wanting to receive mentorship or study with you. How can we connect with you?
Okay, so the basic hub is really my own personal site. So that's marcuskatz.com, marcuskatz.com. And all of our other projects like Magica School, the Tarot Association, the Crucible Club, the Order of Everlasting Day, they all branch off my one page. So I'll try to put them all in that one page.
Awesome, Marcus. So I'll put that information down below so that our listeners and viewers have the ability to reach out to you because I've truly enjoyed this conversation that we had today. And I'm sure our listeners and viewers will as well because it's such a depth of beginning, I think, for someone who is coming into this teaching for the first time to have this as their touchstone. And I definitely wish that when I was 12 years old, I had this sort of orientation or I had heard this conversation that we're having right now because it would have grounded me a lot earlier. Or maybe I needed to have that chaos for a bit to then find the grounding that I have today. But all the same, I'm deeply appreciative of this conversation.
Thank you very much. Nothing is wasted, that is for sure.
Nothing is wasted. And to our listeners and viewers out there, if this is your 100th time joining us here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast, or if this is time number 1, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for continuing to share in this virtual, astrological, and mystical space with us. I receive your comments, I receive your feedback, I receive your encouragement, but most importantly, I receive your love. So if you want to continue to be a part of the magic and the momentum that we're building here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast, give yourself a moment, go down below and like this amazing interview, but also subscribe to the Oraculos True Divination podcast and share this magical conversation with your other astrologically and magically minded friends, because more and more people need to know about these amazing conversations that we're having with these amazing teachers from around the world. So until next time, I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, wishing you love, peace, leaving you in hope. Until we meet again. Bye-bye. Marcus Katz.
Thank you.